Hello everyone, welcome to another edition of What's Going On. I'm your host Tom DeAmber. As always, we are very thankful that you take the time from your busy day to join us. If you had the opportunity to watch our last couple of weeks of our shows, I'm sure you left there in a little bit of dismay and confusion with regards to how the corporation that we call the United States government actually declared us post-event of the bankruptcy of 1933, which we have covered in other shows, how they actually declared us enemies of the government. If you remember, we went over the 1917 Trading with the Enemies Act, where, and we read the language verbatim, where they went over the idea and the language of actually, who and is the enemy of the United States, and also with regards to the implications, what you had to do to be declared an enemy of the United States. If you were financing a particular enemy, whether you were financing, fighting alongside of, or implementing or helping or aiding in any way. And then in 1933, when the foreign corporation that you know as the Federal Reserve banking system through the International Monetary Fund, when the corporation that we call the government went insolvent to these foreign bankers, they made an amendment to the 1917 Trading with the Enemies Act in 1933 and declared you and I the enemies of the United States. And I know, folks, that sounds crazy. It may not make sense to you in the sense, but because of the conditioning that we've all been brought into throughout our lives, whether it be through the television set, the public schools, and whichever. So I had a couple of comments from folks who have been watching the show, and they requested that we get into this in a little bit more depth. A couple of them hadn't seen previous shows where we got into the idea, well, not the idea, I'm sorry, but they haven't got into the understanding, if you would, of that the United States government is a corporation. If you remember in previous shows, we took out our Black's Law Dictionary and we actually read verbatim the definition of the United States. And if you remember, it was 1, the United States was a corporation. Number 2, the United States was the union that makes up the 50 states with the United States of America. And the third part of the definition was the geographical areas thereof, whether it be the 50 states that make up the Union or the enclaves, territories, and districts that make up what we know as the federal government. So it's very important that you understand that when you are dealing with the United States in any kind of legal or contractual form, what's called juristic, that you are dealing with the corporation. The corporation went insolvent to these private foreign bankers that you know as the Federal Reserve, as we have demonstrated on this show on numerous occasions. But it's the corporation that is dealing and contracting and communicating with you. It's not the union that makes up the United States of America, which consists of the 50 states. It's not the geographical territory that's communicating with you. It is the corporation. And if you remember, at one point we said, I don't care what state you're from, I want you to take out your driver's license and I want you to look at the name. And the name, as we described also, is called the nom de guerre, and it's in all uppercase black ink. And you'll find this in any communication that this corporation that you know is the United States is communicating with you, because they are communicating with the nom de guerre, the corporate entity. And so I had some of the folks that were watching the show, and again, we're very thankful for that you are watching. They just wanted us to go forward a little bit deeper into this and do a quick review, which is what we're going to do. So what we're going to do is we're going to take out our Black's Law Dictionary. This is the 4th edition. If you remember, we had said that that this whole legalese is a language unto itself. So what I'd like to do, first of all, is let's look up the definition of corporation. And if you remember, the corporation, and I'm just going to read this verbatim. Now, this is Black's Law Dictionary, page 409. Okay? A corporation is, and I'm reading this verbatim, folks, Okay, corporation, page 409, Black's Fourth Law Dictionary. An artificial person or legal entity created by or under the authority of law of a state or nation, composed, in some rare instances, of a single person and or his successors, being that the incumbents of a particular office, but ordinarily consisting of an association of numerous individuals whose substance as a body politic under a special denomination. So it's important that you understand that a corporation is an artificial entity. It's an artificial person or legal entity, as the dictionary says. So let's get into this, the nom de guerre, the name that we all represent through deception. Okay? Now, corporate name. When a corporation is erected, a name is always given to it, or supposing none to be actually given, will attach to it by implication. Okay? Now, what they're saying there is exactly what I'm saying to you, is that you through ignorance, not stupidity, folks, through ignorance, you haven't been exposed to this information because you're not going to get this information in the public schools, okay? So I'm not saying you're stupid, I'm just saying you're ignorant in the facts that you have not been presented and or researched this information. But as we said, when you go into court or you're dealing with any one of these alphabet agencies of this corporation, you are dealing in a language unto its own. All right? So it's important that you understand that, and this is what they're saying here, is that when a corporation is erected, a name is always given to it, and supposedly none to be actually given will attach to it by implication. The implication is because of contracts that your mother signed as a newborn, when you were a neonate and your mother signed a contract called a birth certificate, which we're going to get into at some point here. But basically you have to understand is that you are representing the artificial entity. You are representing the corporation that this insolvent corporation is communicating with. It's really, it may seem crazy, and it is, and it may seem confusing, but it's really not. Just understand that there are really two of you, okay? There is the corporate entity, which is the uppercase black ink name that you go along representing through these contracts with the government and non-government corporations. And then there is the flesh and blood you. And let's back that up a little bit. When you are born, okay, through live birth, that's what the legal definition, there's two records that are facilitated through this. And one is the record of birth. Now, the record of birth goes to the health department. That's the flesh and blood you. That's the natural person in law. And that goes to the health department for records, okay? And then there is the birth certificate. Now, as we said before, a certificate is a negotiable instrument, meaning bearer use of. Someone's allowing you to use something, whatever it may be, your land, your car, yourself, whatever it may be. So, in law, there are two of you. There is the artificial entity, the nom de guerre, the corporate entity, uppercase black ink, that we represent every day, that we become liable for because we assume through implementation of the name that we are liable for all rights and responsibilities of this artificial corporate entity. It's really very simple. But let's go on reading about corporate. Corporate legal individual. Municipal corporations possess two kinds of power: governmental and public, and priority and private. And in exercise of a former, corporation is a municipal government, while as to the later, a corporation is a legal individual. Okay? Now this comes from Hermeke County versus Village of Hemekern, excuse me. And then I'm not going to read all the subjects to you, but you can get Black's Law Dictionary, go to page 409, and you'll see that. So again, this is who the insolvency, this is who the IRS, this is who the insolvent corporation or any of its agencies are communicating with the artificial corporate entity that we represent. Okay, so I hope we cleared that up for you folks a little bit. I know it can be tough to understand because, you know, the school system is controlled by the very same entity. They're not going to teach you that you are bonded at birth because of the insolvency of the corporation that you call the government. They're not going to teach you, as we have demonstrated to you, that you are working for fiat legal tender, not money. Do you remember we looked up the definition of money? And oh, be God, we've found out that money, we don't have money. Okay, so let's do that again. Let's look up the definition of money again. Black's Law Dictionary, page 1157. In its usual and ordinary exception, it means gold, silver, or paper money used as a circulating medium of exchange and does not embrace notes, bonds, or evidence of debt. Do you remember when we looked up what a note is? Because we all look at the very top of this medium of exchange that we use, and it says right at the very top of it, Federal Reserve note. And we broke all this down, so I don't want to be redundant to folks who have watched the previous shows. But this is the kind of information that you're missing, folks, if you're not watching this program and others like it. So we look at the very top, all uppercase, okay? So it's a corporation. Federal Reserve. We know the Federal Reserve is a private foreign banking cartel. We've demonstrated that numerous times on this show, and we've demonstrated that through law. And we also discovered that we didn't have money because why? Because money does not embrace notes, bonds, or evidence of debt. And what is a note? An acknowledgement of debt. And so you have to understand, folks, that we use legal tender as is printed on this medium of exchange. There is no money. There is no gold and silver. There is no dollars. You remember when we broke down the different coinage acts of the founding era of this country? Article 1, Section 8 of the United States Constitution, the de jure Constitution, said that the Congress will regulate the value thereof, okay, and the issuing power. And that issuing power will be kept in the hands of the Congress, not a private foreign bank that we know as the Federal Reserve, and that it must have intrinsic value species of gold or silver. And then we went to the Coinage Acts and we looked up verbatim that a dollar, in its true legal sense, is 25.8 grains of gold and a 15-to-1 ratio of silver, okay, which is constitutional money. So this is why we do not have money. This is why there is two signatures on this medium of exchange, and we got into this. One's the creditor, one's the debtor, okay, and it's why it says legal tender, because it's not money. It is legal tender. You are being forced to use this instrument of debt as a medium of exchange. Well, folks, the number one question should be in your head right now is what happened to our money? How did we go from a vibrant, industrious, sovereign nation into a nation of slaves? And if you think the word slave is too strong of a word to describe our situation, well, let's look up the words, Black's Law Dictionary, let's look up the word Freeman, and let's look up the word slave. And then you can tell me, folks, where you are. I'm not going to make judgment for you, okay? You can judge this for yourself. So, we don't have money, we have legal tender, we have no intrinsic value, we have a debt instrument. That we have made quite clear, and this instrument is a medium of exchange, and the power of issuing power is controlled by a foreign private corporation that you know as the Federal Reserve. This is not for debate, folks, okay? This is the reality of where we are. So, let's look up the word Freeman, because you know, and here in the state of Vermont, and it's a beautiful thing when you're going to register, which we'll get into that. When you go to register to vote, what do you take? You take a Freeman's Oath, okay? So, and this Freeman's Oath comes back from the founding period of the state of Vermont. So, these people, folks, I know you're going to think this is crazy, this statement, and this is not just conjecture, this is fact. These people understood the English language and multiple languages much better than we do today. And they understood the events of history. And they understood what it takes to be a free people, okay, and what a free person was. So let's look up Freeman, and let's look up slave, and you answer the question in your heart and in your head yourself, Which category do you think you're part of? Freeman, Black's Law Dictionary, page 791, 4th edition. Not subject to legal constraint of another, unconstrained, having power to follow the dictates of his own will, not subject to the dominion of another, not compelled to involuntary servitude, used in this sense as opposed to being a slave. Now, I want to read that one more time, and I want you to think about these words. Not subject to a legal constraint of another, unconstrained, having power to follow the dictates of his own will, not subject to the dominion of another, not compelled to involuntary servitude, used in the sense as opposed to slave. Okay, so now, obviously, the next thing to do would be, so we can compare these two dominions, where we are. Let's look up the word slave, okay? And I apologize. It seems that one of my notes slipped on me here. My apologies. But, folks, this is very, very important that you understand your status in law and your status as a freeman and your status as a human being as to where you are in the eyes of the law and in the eyes of history. Very, very important. Slave. A person who is wholly subject to the will of another. One who has no freedom of action, but whose person and services are wholly under the control of another. One who is under the power of a master, and who belongs to him, so that the master may sell and dispose of his person, of his industry, and of his labor, without his being able to do anything, have anything, or acquire anything by what must belong to his master. Slavery, the condition of a slave. That civil relation in which one man has absolute power over the life, fortune, and liberty of another. I got to read that one more time. Slavery, the condition of a power, that civil relation in which one man has absolute power over the life, fortune, and liberty of another. Now, I want you to ask yourself in your daily life, are you a freeman or are you a slave? Okay? Because if you think you're a freeman, I want you to think about this for a minute. First of all, you're using a medium of exchange that doesn't even qualify as money, it's debt. Guess where the credit, if you would, comes from the debt. The insolvent corporation is insolvent. It has no more equity in it. It has no more intrinsic value of it. Okay? We have, that's not up for discussion anymore, and I'll tell you the reason why, folks, because like I said in other shows and what we just looked up here, we do not have money. But let's go beyond the money. Let's think about our daily lives. Do you travel freely? No. You need a license to travel in this country. Do you do anything without paying a tax, including eat? Do you eat freely? No, you don't. And we won't even get into what you're eating, but do you eat freely? No, you don't. Do you purchase anything freely? No, you don't. Can you put a septic system on your supposed land freely so you can use the bathroom? Nope. Can't do that either, can you? Can you put in a water system on your supposed land freely? No, you can't. So you got to think, what can I do freely? And if I can't do any of these basic entities of life, these very basic things that we all need to sustain ourselves and our families, can you build a house freely? No, you can't. You better get a permit. You better pay the master for the use of his land. And every time you make an improvement on the master's land through your labors and through your medium of exchange you have to go out and earn, what happens? Your taxes go up. The master collects more. Can you work freely? No, you can't. Try working without the proper paperwork, the proper registrations, and the proper taxes being taken out of your debt instrument through your labors. So folks, what can you do freely? And oh, you might get to the point, well, okay, I can't use the bathroom freely, I can't drink water freely, I can't eat freely, I can't travel freely, I can't build a house for once freely, I can't even work freely. So you may think, well, you know what, I can still breathe freely. Well, let me tell you something. If all this global warming facade gets into play, folks, we're going to be paying a thing called carbon taxes. Oh, think of this. You eat a piece of steak, guess who exhales carbon? The cow. Guess what instrument which is traveling from point A, from point B to you, the truck, is emitting? You go to buy a gallon of gasoline, you're going to pay carbon taxes. And you know what, folks? Guess what you exhale? You exhale carbon. You are going to be purchasing carbon credits. Now, I know you're thinking to yourself, oh, come on, Tom, this just can't be. Of course, if you went back 100 years ago in this country, they would never think that they were going to license you to travel, that they were going to tax you to eat, to put a bathroom, to build a house, to work, to travel. They couldn't even fathom that understanding of that thought. Would never happen in this country, huh? You know how many times I have heard from all different generations, and I'm 50 years old, that you'll never see it happen here. Well, the things that people were telling me as a child that you will never see happen here are common day events now. Okay? Can you imagine going up to the founding fathers or the people of that period and tell them, I need a license to travel. I need a license to build my cabin out in this woods on land that I think I own. I need a license to put in a septic system. I need a license to go to work. I need a license to feed my family, and I'm going to pay taxes to do it. Okay? This is where we are, folks. And you have to ask yourself, are you a freeman or are you a slave? And I think if you understand and can get by the conditioning, get outside the cage that they have enveloped around you, I think you will have to look at yourself in the mirror with the understanding that I am not a free man. I'm really not. And I have to ask myself and the people behind the camera here, what can we do to change this? And you're not going to change it by sitting on the couch, okay? And you have to ask yourself, how did this come about? And that's what we've been trying to do with this show. We've been trying to demonstrate the ifs, the whens, the whats, okay? How we got to this point. And most of it is through deception and a lot of corruption. So, with that being said, I'd like to go back to this corporation that we call the United States, that we answer to, okay? Because, folks, the government has become a tool for the corporation that we know as the Federal Reserve through a group of international bankers. That's all the government is. The government is a strong arm because they have to answer to these bankers because they are insolvent to them. Do you remember that quote that we read from Lincoln? I think it was show number 2, maybe 3, that when the Southern Army, the Confederate Army, was in his front door. And I can remember the quote pretty much verbatim, but it was like this. Abraham Lincoln, he said, I have the Confederate Army at my front door and the international banksters, and that's the word he used, at my back door. And for the future of my nation, it is the bankers that I fear the most. Do you remember Jefferson's quote about, I believe that bankers are more of a threat to our liberties than standing armies? That's quite a statement, okay? And this is, we go back to Benjamin Franklin's quote about the primary reason for the War of Independence was because the king would not allow the colonies to have their own interest-free money, okay? So it does come down to money, folks, because just like Baron Rothschild said, give me control of a nation's currency, I care not who makes its laws. And it's that simple, okay? So let's get into just a couple of things here. First, and I know for some of you guys and gals who have been watching this program, this is going to be a little bit of redundancy, but please bear with me because I'm going to try to keep the redundancy very, very quick, all right? So what we need to do is find out, where do we stand in the scheme of these things, all right? So let's look up the word person. Okay, person. Now, believe it or not, folks, there are different understandings of what a person is, okay? Now, let's just go person, an entity. Oh, excuse me here, look at this. An entity such as a corporation having the rights and duties of a human being. Okay? Do you remember in Black's Law Dictionary, we looked up person, of course it was a man and woman in the human sense. This is a law book, so all the language here is with regards to law. Okay? Person, an entity such as a corporation, having the rights and duties of a human being. Very interesting. Okay? And now, artificial person, an entity such as a corporation created by law and given certain legal rights and duties as and of a human being, a being real or imaginary, who for the purpose of legal reasoning is treated more or less as a human being. Also termed fictitious person, juristic person, and legal person. Okay? This is the entity that we are describing to you, that the artificial corporation, excuse me, all corporations are artificial because they're created by a natural man. But this is the entity that we are describing to you, that you are taking the rights and responsibilities of. Okay? Now, let's go on here. The legal definition of human being, excuse me, is conveniently missing from the law dictionary containing in the above definitions. The difference between a human being and an artificial person has been so blurred, intentionally and legally, by those who enrich themselves at your expense via the legal system. Okay? So it's very important that you understand this, that there are two of you in terms of law. There is the natural flesh and blood you. There is the artificial person, the corporate entity that you carry your daily business on as. Okay? You know, and it's interesting because when you look up legal fiction, which is what the corporate entity is, it's something assumed in law to be a fact, irrespective of whether it is the truth or the accuracy of that assumption. In other words, folks, it doesn't matter that this artificial entity is not real, because in the eyes of the law, and let's read that again, irrespective of the truth or its accuracy, that is who they are dealing with. That is who they are communicating and contracting with. So it's very important that you understand that, okay? So we've broken down what a person is. We've broken down where you stand in the eyes of the law as a freeman or the slave. And folks, let me say something, and this is conjunction on my part. A corporation can never be free, because a corporation has to stand by the guide laws of law of the corporates. Agreed? A freeman is free in the sense that I do not have to go by the guise of the corporate law. And let's back that up. Let's just say I'm a member of the XY club, and you're not a member of that XY club. Do you care, or does the bylaws and guide laws of the XY club, are they levied on you? Are they part of your life? Are you managing your life by them bylaws? No, because you're not a member of it. I have to, because I'm a member of it. A free man regulates his life by the morals that society agree upon. That's really, when you look up common law, what common law is. And of course, we don't have common law anymore. How can we have common law? Can we have common law if you're a corporate entity? Absolutely not. You have to pay attention to corporate law. And this, folks, is where the statutes come in. All right? So it's important that you understand that. And again, if some of this is redundant to you, I apologize, but I want to go back over some of these things. Okay, now let's get into, we were talking about our money system, all right? and we were going to get into what basically what a note is, and I'll be real quick with this, but I think this definition sums it up rather well. A writing acknowledgement of a debt or a promising of payment. See, folks, a writing acknowledgement of debt. Remember, Federal Reserve note. And as we say on this show on numerous occasions, that instrument that you use for a medium of exchange is an acknowledgement of the debt. Okay? Very, very important that you understand that also. Now, I do want to get into one statement that was made. See, you have to understand, folks, that we don't have money, as we've demonstrated, okay? What we do have is an instrument of debt, all right? And this debt, so if we don't have money, if there's no intrinsic value, gold or silver at this point, being brought into the system, how is our money created? I'm sorry, I apologize to you. I shouldn't be using the word money. How is our credit and or legal tender created, okay? Because it's all debt. Everything is debt, all right? Now, I want you to think about this. If I have a Federal Reserve note, one Federal Reserve note, and it's debt, because remember we got into the mechanisms of our money system? The Treasury is insolvent to the Federal Reserve. So the Treasury from the Congress says, for the budget reasons, okay, we need whatever, $1 trillion this year for our budget. So we get permission from this private federal cartel bank corporation that you know as the Federal Reserve to print this instrument, this Federal Reserve note, and then there is a balance due of interest on it. Are you with me? The mechanics of this? So, okay, so the government says we need $1 trillion. The Federal Reserve merely makes an entry on a ledger, gives us permission to print this, okay? But with that permission comes a burden. And the burden is an interest on every Federal Reserve note that we print, just to get permission to do it, okay? So how can you get out of debt, folks? Because if you print more money to pay the interest on the original $1 trillion, guess what? And I know you're figuring this out. Guess what? Now you've got a shift of another interest, of a greater interest and burden, because you had to create the money to pay the initial interest. It's just like this $28 trillion we just gave the bankers. And we did. $28 trillion, no accountability, not a mortgage paid, and the money's been allowed to go offshore. And there's a great thing, if you go on the internet and punch in Bernie Sanders from the Senator of Vermont and Bernanke, and Bernie Sanders says to Ben Bernanke flat out, you know, are you going to tell us where this money went? And Bernanke just matter-of-factly says to him, no. Not no, we're not, no, I can't. He just says no. And the reason why, folks, they're a private, superior position to the inferior position of the insolvent corporation that you know as the government. And this is the reason why. So, when you understand the mechanics of where we are, you have to understand that the system that we're in right now is perpetual debt. There is no way out of it. Okay? There is no way to pay off the debt. Folks, what does two negatives always create? Now, interesting enough, I was speaking in front of about 6 or 8 students recently, and I asked this question to them. I said, folks, what does two negatives always create? And you want to know that half of them said a positive, which is a real sad statement for the public fool system. But, folks, two negatives always create a greater negative. Can you pay off a positive with a negative? You can't. It doesn't work in math, and it doesn't work in reality. Okay? So every dollar that you call a dollar that is in your pocket, there is an interest, a burden due on it. And if you pay off that interest, you have to print more of this phony money, of this fiat money, to pay the interest, which puts you in a greater debt of interest. So we gave the bankers $28 trillion, like I said, no accountability at all, okay? And folks, it doesn't matter if it's the Republicans or the Democrats. They're all controlled by the same entity. You know, you've got to learn to look beyond this divide paradigm they have us locked into. It's so vitally that we get out of this cage and start looking at what's in front of us. We're not going to make a change without understanding our money system. And you know, and that's why they took, besides the reason why Ron Paul was taken out of some of the debates in the last presidential election was because when he said that if the American people are ever going to gain control of their lives, they must gain control of their money system. That was it. Besides him winning the debates, the bankers were not going to allow that, because what does that do? Number one, it makes you realize you don't have a control of a money system. If you don't control the issuance and the value of your currency, folks, you control nothing at all. It's like Baron Rothschild said, give me control of a nation's currency. I care not who makes its laws. Okay, so back to the mechanics of it. So we're in a system of perpetual debt. We work for an instrument of debt by a foreign banking corporation. Now, I found this very interesting. Back in 1992, there was a booklet, if you would, that was put out, and it's called Modern Money Mechanics. Now, this was put out by the Federal Reserve Bank itself. This was not meant to be in the public domain, okay? This was actually supposed to be an instrument of education for the higher echelon bankers that they were, that they were going to bring along and to carry on the scheme. But I want you to really understand this, because this is page 6 of that document, Modern Money Mechanics, page 6, Federal Reserve Bank. This is actually of Chicago in 1992. What the banks do when they make loans is to accept promissory notes in exchange for credits to the borrower's transaction accounts. Now, what does that mean in legalese? It means in legalese what I just said to you, okay? We create our medium of exchange through debt. And I want to qualify that. You go to take out a car loan. You sign what? You sign a promissory note. You agree to pay X amount of money on a monthly basis. You agree to put the car up for collateral if you can't pay it. And you agree to the interest rate. And you agree to the terms of that contract with regards to time. Okay? So you have signed a promissory note to this lending institution that you're going to make this payment every month with this collateralized and for the term and the interest. Okay? So what do, folks? They take that promissory note, they put it on their books, on their ledger as an asset because you have agreed to make these payments, and then they cut you a check with it. Think of that. You created the asset. And that's exactly what they're saying here. Okay? You created the asset by signing the promissory note that they put on their ledger, creating an asset, and they cut you a check with that. They're cutting you a check with the promise that you're going to pay them someday with all these terms met and collateralizing. Do you remember how when we got into the Federal Reserve, and I think I have that handy, we got into the Federal Reserve and they were talking about monetizing debt? Do you remember that? Okay. This is exactly what they've done. They have monetized the debt. Okay. And I'm sorry, I do have it in my notes here, but I don't want to get into that right now because I'll just digress some more on you. I want to stay over here where we're supposed to be. So, understand the mechanics of that. You go to take out a mortgage. Remember the word mortgage? We looked it up before. Death, pledge. Okay? So understand the mechanics of this. You go take out a loan. You create the asset. They put it on their ledgers as an asset. And then they lend you the asset back at interest that you created. And our money system is the same way. The Federal Reserve Bank gives us permission to print the money, and then they charge us an interest because they gave us that permission. That, folks, as Benjamin Franklin eloquently said, was the underlying reason for the American War of Independence. Okay? I know there's a lot there to understand, and I know there's a lot there you may be saying this just can't be true. But I want you to understand This is the mechanics. According to the Modern Money Mechanics, page 6 of the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago in 1992, what the banks do when they make loans is to accept promissory notes in exchange for credits to the borrower's transaction account. Okay? Pretty interesting when you understand the scam that is controlling our lives. And when you create that asset, that debt, as a nation, as a people, there is a burden of interest attached to it. That if you create more money to pay off that interest, you are deeper in debt from the interest due. So like I said, we give the bankers $28 trillion that we already have to pay in interest to these very same bankers to create. They take the $28 trillion, do what they want with it, which is buy up a lot of good assets, okay, and give out billions of dollars of bonuses and salaries and so forth, all right? So we have to pay them for the original interest on that loan due, all right? They not only get the $28 trillion, folks, they're getting the interest payment on the $28 trillion for giving us permission as a nation to create the payment, the money to pay them in the first place. Now, if that's not a scam, I don't know what is, but that's where we are. Okay? Now, when you think about this, you're saying, okay, Tom, if our money is all negative, then how is it we're paying off our debts on a personal basis? Okay? Let's take the automobile loan again. I make all these payments and I go on. Or I owe, I owe somebody $10, 10 Federal Reserve notes. How is it that we're paying these things? Are we paying debts? Can two negatives create a positive? No, we've already demonstrated that two negatives just create a greater negative. So, let's look up dischargings of debts, okay? You're going to find this very interesting, and I think this is going to upset you a little bit. Not that we're here to upset you, but you got to understand where we are. Okay. First of all, let's look up what a Federal Reserve note is. The highest examples of a commercial lien is a Federal Reserve note commonly found in commercial circulation and is a commercial lien upon the labor and industry of all Americans by the international banking system. This comes from the Fundamental Principles and Processes of Commercial Law by Hartford Van Dyke. I want to read that again so this legal definition will fit in with the mechanics that I just spoke of. Federal Reserve note, this is what you're working for every day. This is what you're judging your life on every day. How successful of a man or a woman or a human being are you? You're judging it on the accumulation of a debt instrument. Federal Reserve note, the highest example of a commercial lien is a Federal Reserve note, commonly found in commercial circulation and is a commercially lien upon the labor and industry of all Americans by the international banking system. Again, this was the Fundamental Principles and Processes of Commercial Law by Hartford Van Dyke. Now, a couple of things to jump out at you. First of all, we know the Federal Reserve is not federal, and it has no reserves. They've taken it all. We understood, as we looked up, what a note is, an acknowledgement of debt. But where is this found? It's found in commercial circulation. Folks, commercial law can only be affiliated with what? Corporations and corporate entities. It is a commercial lien. Now, why is it a lien? Because it is an acknowledgement of debt. Okay? And what is it extracting? It's extracting the labor and industry of all Americans by the international banking system. This international banking system, folks, starts at the Federal Reserve, goes to the IMF, and when you get to the top of the pyramid, you're going to find an organization called the Bank of International Settlements. That is where your birth certificate winds up. Okay? So, we understand the mechanics. We understand what we have for a medium of exchange, and more importantly, what we don't have. And we also understand, in the eyes of the law, what we are using for that medium of exchange, which is the Federal Reserve note. So again, can two negatives create a positive? No, it can't. It doesn't work in math. It doesn't work in real life. So how do we pay off debts? Well, let's see what we do. Okay. You have to understand, folks, that, how do I describe this to you? That paying off a debt means there is no more negative, okay? If I'm into debt for a friend of mine for that $10, and I pay the $10, the negative is eradicated. It's gone. It doesn't exist anymore because the promise to my friend of $10 was met with a positive. All right, if we had real money, if we had intrinsic value in our money. So it would balance each other, right? We got $10 of negative, we got $10 of positive, equals 0. If we have $10 of negative and another $10 of negative, what's that create? Creates a greater negative. It's really very simple. So can we and do we pay off debts, the negative entries, with our negative debt money system? We can't. So what do we do? Here's what we do. We discharge debts. Now, discharge, the opposite of charge, hence to release, to liberate, annul, unburden, disencumber. In the laws of contracts, to cancel or unloose the obligation of a contract, to make an agreement or contract null and inoperative. Discharge is a generic term. Its principal species are rescission, release, accord and satisfaction, performance, judgment, compensation, bankruptcy, and or merger. Okay? To satisfy and or dismiss the obligations of the contract by the method which is legally a legal duty is extinguished. This is, and I want you to go on, I just want to go on here. Because of the bankruptcy of the U.S. government, as memorialized in House Joint Resolution 192 of June 5, 1933, it is no longer possible to pay off and or extinguish debts. We used to be able to pay debts using species of gold and silver coin, but that was declared against public policy with HJR 192, and next week, folks, we're going to get into this document, HJR 192. Now we can only discharge debts by passing debt paper as legal tender. Are you with me? Okay? So we don't pay off, extinguish the debt. We merely, and let me read that verbatim to you. Okay, because of the bankruptcy of the U.S. government, as memorialized in the House Joint Resolution 192 of June 5, 1933, it is no longer possible to pay off and or extinguish debts. We used to be able to pay debts using species of gold and or silver coin, but that was declared against public policy in HJR 192. Now we can only discharge debts by passing debt paper as legal tender. So the debt is not paid off. The debt is not extinguished. It is merely unloosened, to use the language that they use. All right? It is hence to release. Okay? Has the burden been really met? No, it hasn't. But because we're using legal tender, and because it's against the policy, oh, key word here. Folks, you know one thing that jumped out to me years ago when I started studying this stuff? When you see law, law is part of the government. When you see policy, that's part of a corporation in language. So I just think that's rather interesting. So we do not pay off debts. We merely discharge debts, just as when I was in the Marine Corps or other people who were in the military, they got discharged. They were no longer obligated to the terms of the contract that they signed by enlisting. Does that mean they don't exist anymore? No. It just means the obligation is passed on. Okay? That's what a discharge is. And that's what we do with our money system. So we've gotten into some pretty interesting things. And I knew I was going to, at this show, I was going to try to get into where our money goes from the income taxes. And I just want to read something to you real quick. And I'll probably cover this next week, folks. As a matter of fact, I'm pretty sure I will. In 1984, or actually in 83, Ronald Reagan created a commission called the Grace Commission. And what he wanted to do was, it was through a project called the Private Sector Survey on Cost Control. Basically, Ronald Reagan was trying to figure out, okay, we're into debt up to our elbows here. The American people are burdened tremendously on their daily lives because of this debt. Do you remember when Ronald Reagan was running for president? He said, government cannot solve the problem. Government is the problem. He was talking about the government of that day, which is even worse today. But, so the Grace Commission went and really did an audit about, okay, all this money is coming in from different avenues, you know, from tariffs, from income taxes, from road usage tax, all these different avenues that the government collects. As we spoke in other shows, folks, 56 cents of every dollar that comes to the American household on average goes to the government now, and or its incorporations, okay? Unbelievable. You know, I remember reading as a child about the days of feudalism where it was just terrible. The farmers had to give 50% of the crops to the landowners. We're beyond that, folks. We're beyond feudalism now. But let's read the findings of the Grace Commission from Private Sector Survey on Cost Control implemented by Ronald Reagan. I'm going to read this verbatim to you. 100% of what is collected is absorbed solely by the interest on the federal debt and by federal government contributions to transfer payments. In other words, all individual income tax revenues are gone before one nickel is spent on the services which taxpayers expect from their government. Grace Commission report to the President, January 15th, 1984. So, all of the income taxes that you pay, okay, go to the very same bankers who are collecting the interest on a debt that is artificial, on a debt that they give us permission to print our own money. And that includes the $28 trillion that they just got, that your great-grandchildren, and I don't care if you're 15 years old right now, are still going to be laboring to cover. This is where we are. And this is why I want to ask you, are you a freeman or are you a slave? And you look at yourself in the mirror and you ask yourself, am I really free? You know, we have this, we have our guys and gals now, you know, dying and losing life and limb and destroying millions of human beings throughout this world because they're fighting for our freedoms. I want you to list the freedoms. Please respond. I want to know what freedoms you have. Were the people of Iraq a threat to our freedoms? Were the people of Afghanistan, Vietnam, Somalia? I can go on and go on and go on. Were they a threat to your freedoms, your everyday freedoms? Were they controlling you through deception? Were they taxing you to the point that the average family with two individuals in it, now 56 cents of every dollar goes to that corporation? Are you free? Are you free to build a house? Are you free to travel? Ask yourself, folks. Get outside the conditioning that they have used the public fool system and television and the media to make you just this person in a cage. As I like to say, folks, all we are bigger gerbils and bigger cages. And all we do is get on that wheel every day and we spin and we spin and we spin with no hope in sight of gaining control of our lives, of having to answer to this entity on a daily basis and under the threat of imprisonment, fining, and duress. So, are you a freeman or are you a slave? Look in the mirror, analyze your life, and ask yourself and be truthful with your answer. Because this is the reality that we all, as the corporate entity, the nom de guerre, are living under. With that being said, folks, I apologize. We're out of time again. I know that this hour goes by very fast. And as always, we're not here to upset you. We're here to educate and make you understand how we got into the predicament where we are, okay? And there's one last thing I want to leave before we do. There's a quote by John Adams, and he said, "Necessity is the cry of tyrants." See, we had to give the bankers his $28 trillion, or their big companies were going to fall. Folks, they made money all the way up, and now they're making money all the way down. And you want to know another thing when you read this bailout bill? All the assets that we bailed out were bailed out at 100% value prior to the depreciation of the assets. So your house was worth $300,000 3 years ago. Let's say it's worth $200,000 now. That would be like you being bailed out of your mortgage at the $300 price and not the true value of the asset. Think of that, okay? This was all done by the cloak of necessity by a bunch of corporate tyrants. And that's where we are. With that being said, folks, as always, we are very, very appreciative of you watching our program. We ask you to look in the mirror and ask, go on the internet, take out a dictionary, look up Freeman, look up slave. Be honest with yourself. Which position are you filling? Thank you for watching, folks, and we look forward to seeing you next week where we will continue on this topic. Thank you.